The year is 1818. The United States, a young nation, stretches westward. In the South, a way of life thrives, built on the backs of enslaved Africans. Vast plantations, opulent and cruel, define the landscape. This is the antebellum South, a world on the precipice of change. This is the story of Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, a man who embodied the triumphs and tragedies of the Confederacy. On May 28, 1818, near New Orleans, Louisiana, a son is born to the prominent Toutant Beauregard family. They christen him Pierre Gustave Toutant, a name that speaks to their French heritage. Little do they know that this child will one day command armies and shape the destiny of a nation. The Beauregards, members of the Creole elite, own a sprawling sugar plantation just outside New Orleans. Their wealth is built on the labor of enslaved Africans, a stark reality that will forever color young Pierre's upbringing. He grows up surrounded by the opulence and contradictions of plantation life. Life on the plantation is a double-edged sword for young Pierre. He enjoys a privileged existence, surrounded by luxury and attended to by a retinue of servants. Yet he also witnesses the brutal realities of slavery, the casual cruelty inflicted upon those deemed less than human. These early experiences leave an indelible mark on his psyche, shaping his worldview and influencing his future choices. Despite his privileged upbringing, Pierre is not immune to the harsh realities of plantation life. These formative experiences instill in him a sense of pragmatism and a deep sense of loyalty. As Pierre grows older, he becomes increasingly aware of the expectations placed upon him. His family's legacy weighs heavily on his shoulders. He is groomed for a life of leadership, expected to follow in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. At West Point, he excels in his studies, demonstrating a natural aptitude for military strategy and engineering. Despite occasional clashes with authority, he graduates with honors, his reputation as a brilliant but headstrong young officer preceding him. Upon graduation, he embarks on a promising military career, serving with distinction in the Second Seminole War and the Mexican-American War. As the 1850s dawn, the United States finds itself teetering on the brink of disaster. The issue of slavery, long a source of tension, has ignited into a raging inferno. Pierre, now a rising star in the U.S. Army, finds himself caught in the middle of this maelstrom. He is a Southerner by birth, raised in a society that views slavery as an integral part of its social and economic fabric. Yet he is also a patriot, sworn to uphold the Constitution and defend the Union. The year 1860 dawns with a palpable sense of dread. The United States, once a beacon of unity and hope, finds itself fractured by the divisive issue of slavery. The election of Abraham Lincoln, a staunch opponent of slavery in November 1860, proves to be the tipping point. Southern states, fearing the loss of their autonomy, view Lincoln's victory as a direct threat to their existence. Secession, once unthinkable, becomes a terrifying reality. In February 1861, as the newly formed Confederacy asserts its independence, Beauregard faces a heart-wrenching decision. He is summoned to Montgomery, Alabama, the Confederate capital, where he is offered the position of Brigadier General in the Confederate Army. Torn between his conflicting allegiances, Beauregard wrestles with his conscience. Despite his misgivings, Beauregard ultimately chooses to cast his lot with the Confederacy. On February 20, 1861, he resigns his commission in the U.S. Army and accepts the rank of Brigadier General in the Confederate Army. With Beauregard's defection, the Confederacy gains a skilled tactician and a charismatic leader. He is immediately dispatched to Charleston, South Carolina, where tensions are reaching a boiling point over the fate of Fort Sumter. Beauregard arrives in Charleston to find a city on edge, spoiling for a fight. On April 12, 1861, after days of escalating tensions, Confederate batteries open fire on Fort Sumter. The bombardment marks the beginning of the American Civil War. The bombardment of Fort Sumter ignites a firestorm across the nation. In the North, outrage at the Confederate attack fuels a wave of patriotic fervor. In the South, the attack on Fort Sumter is met with jubilation. Beauregard is ordered to Virginia, where a massive Union army under General Irvin McDowell is preparing to march on Richmond. On July 21, 1861, the two armies clashed near the town of Manassas, Virginia. The First Battle of Manassas is a resounding victory for the Confederacy, solidifying Beauregard's reputation as a brilliant military strategist. The victory at Manassas, while a strategic triumph for the Confederacy, comes at a heavy cost. The battlefield is littered with the dead and dying, a grim testament to the horrors of war. Beauregard, despite his elation at the Confederate victory, is deeply affected by the carnage he has witnessed. The weight of command, the responsibility for sending men to their deaths, weighs heavily on him. Despite his personal misgivings, Beauregard knows that the war is far from over. He throws himself into fortifying Confederate defenses, training new recruits, and planning for future campaigns. As 1861 draws to a close, the initial euphoria of the Confederate victory at Manassas fades. The war settles into a grim stalemate, a bloody back and forth across a divided land. Beauregard, ever the strategist, recognizes the shifting tides of war. He advocates for a defensive strategy, arguing that the Confederacy's best hope lies in wearing down the Union's will to fight. In early 1862, Beauregard is transferred to the Western theater of the war. Beauregard adapts quickly to this new environment, employing his trademark tactical brilliance to counter the Union's advantages. In April 1862, Beauregard faces his toughest test yet. Grant, emboldened by victories, threatens the crucial rail junction at Corinth, Mississippi. Beauregard gathers his forces near Shiloh Church, determined to strike a decisive blow. The Battle of Shiloh rages for 2 bloody days in early April 1862. Confederate forces initially push back Grant's army. Grant, reinforced overnight, launches a fierce counterattack. The Battle of Shiloh is a tactical defeat for the Confederacy. The casualties are staggering, the bloodiest 2 days of fighting in American history. Beauregard is unable to overcome the Union's superior numbers. Shiloh marks a turning point in the war in the West. After the defeat at Shiloh, Beauregard retreats to Corinth, Mississippi, his army battered and demoralized. He knows that Corinth, a vital rail junction, is essential to the Confederacy's defense of the West. He throws himself into fortifying the city, determined to make it a fortress that will break Grant's advance. However, Beauregard, weakened by illness and exhaustion, is forced to relinquish command of the Confederate forces at Corinth in late May 1862. His departure is a severe blow to Confederate morale, as his soldiers and the Southern public had come to see him as one of their most capable commanders. Beauregard's absence is keenly felt as Union forces, under the command of Henry Halleck, lay siege to Corinth. The siege drags on for weeks, a war of attrition that takes a toll on both sides. In late May, Confederate forces abandoned Corinth, retreating south to Tupelo, Mississippi. The loss of Corinth is a strategic blow to the Confederacy, further weakening its hold on the West and opening the door for continued Union advances. For Beauregard, it is a bitter pill to swallow, a defeat that weighs heavily on his mind and spirit. Following setbacks at Shiloh and Corinth, Beauregard is reassigned to Charleston, South Carolina. The city he returns to is a far cry from the stronghold he left 2 years prior. The Union blockade has strangled Charleston's economy and tested its citizens. Beauregard throws himself into the defense of Charleston with zeal. He understands the city's strategic importance as a vital port and symbol of resistance. Determined to hold it at all costs, he strengthens defenses and prepares for siege. Central to Beauregard's defensive strategy is Fort Sumter, the very symbol of Confederate defiance since its capture at the war's outset. Once a mighty fortress, Fort Sumter has been reduced to rubble by repeated Union bombardments. Yet, Beauregard recognizes its symbolic importance and its potential as a thorn in the side of the Union Navy. Under his direction, Confederate engineers transform the ruined fort into a formidable obstacle. Earthworks are piled high, gun emplacements are reinforced, and intricate tunnels are dug to protect defenders from enemy fire. Fort Sumter, though a shadow of its former self, becomes a testament to Confederate ingenuity and determination. Beauregard also embraces new technologies in his defense of Charleston. He understands that the Confederacy cannot hope to match the Union's industrial might, but he can leverage innovation to level the playing field. One such innovation is the use of torpedoes, then a relatively new and untested weapon of naval warfare. Under Beauregard's direction, Confederate engineers develop and deploy a series of torpedoes, both tethered and floating in Charleston Harbor. These underwater mines, primitive by modern standards, pose a constant threat to Union warships, forcing them to exercise caution and slowing their progress. Beauregard's embrace of innovation extends beyond torpedoes. He sees potential in another, even more daring technological marvel, the submarine. In 1863, a Confederate engineer named Horace Lawson Hunley presents Beauregard with a prototype of a hand-cranked submarine, christened the H.L. Hunley. Beauregard, ever the visionary, recognizes the potential of this new weapon to break the Union blockade and strike a decisive blow against the enemy fleet. He authorizes the Hunley's development and deployment, despite the risks inherent in such an untested and experimental vessel. The Hunley, a cigar-shaped vessel powered by 8 men cranking a hand-turned propeller, is a dangerous and temperamental machine. Its early trials are plagued by accidents and mechanical failures, resulting in the loss of several crew members, including Hunley himself. Despite these setbacks, Beauregard remains convinced of the Hunley's potential. He pushes for its continued development, believing that its success could turn the tide of the war in the South. His gamble, however, is fraught with risk, a testament to his unwavering belief in Confederate ingenuity and his desperation to find a way to break the Union stranglehold on Charleston. Throughout 1863 and 1864, Charleston endures a relentless bombardment from Union guns. The city, once a bustling center of Southern commerce and culture, is transformed into a besieged fortress. Buildings crumble under the weight of artillery fire. Streets are reduced to rubble, and the lives of its citizens are upended by the constant threat of death from above. Beauregard, witnessing the destruction of the city he has sworn to protect, faces a moral dilemma. He knows that every shell that falls on Charleston brings the Confederacy closer to defeat, yet he cannot bring himself to surrender the city without a fight. He faces growing pressure from Confederate authorities, who demand that he hold Charleston at all costs. He also feels the weight of expectation from the Southern people, who see him as the last line of defense against the hated Yankees. Beauregard, torn between his duty to his country and his compassion for the suffering of Charleston citizens, continues to resist. He knows that surrender is inevitable, but he is determined to make the Union pay dearly for every inch of ground they take. He will fight for Charleston even as it burns around him. In the spring of 1864, with the Confederacy crumbling around him, Beauregard receives a desperate summons. Robert E. Lee, facing overwhelming Union forces under Ulysses S. Grant in Virginia, calls for reinforcements. Beauregard, leaving a skeleton force to defend the remnants of Charleston, boards a train westward, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he is riding towards the Confederacy's last stand. He arrives in Virginia to find Lee's army besieged at Petersburg, a strategic rail hub south of Richmond. Grant's forces, having captured Richmond after a long and bloody campaign, have Lee's army trapped and slowly starving it into submission. Beauregard, despite the hopelessness of the situation, throws himself into the defense of Petersburg with his trademark energy. He rallies the exhausted and demoralized Confederate troops, bolsters their defenses, and prepares for a last-ditch stand against the relentless Union onslaught. He knows that the odds are stacked against him, that the Confederacy's days are numbered. Yet, he cannot bring himself to surrender, not while Lee's army still holds out, not while the flicker of Confederate hope still burns, however faintly. Beauregard's arrival at Petersburg injects a much-needed dose of tactical acumen into the Confederate high command. He immediately recognizes the flaws in the Confederate defenses and proposes bold, albeit risky, plans to counter the Union threat. He advocates for a counteroffensive, a desperate gamble to break the siege and buy precious time for Lee's army to escape westward. He argues that the Confederacy's only hope lies in a daring stroke, a last roll of the dice to change the course of the war. His proposals, however, are met with resistance. Confederate President Jefferson Davis, his government crumbling around him, is reluctant to authorize such a risky maneuver. He fears the political fallout of a failed offensive, the potential for complete and utter collapse if Beauregard's gamble fails. Beauregard, caught between his strategic vision and the political realities of the dying Confederacy, finds himself increasingly frustrated. He sees the writing on the wall, the inevitability of defeat, yet he cannot shake the feeling that one last, desperate move could change everything. The Siege of Petersburg settles into a grim routine. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into months, as Union and Confederate forces face each other across a no-man's land of trenches, earthworks, and barbed wire. The fighting is brutal and unrelenting, a war of attrition that takes a heavy toll on both sides. Beauregard, confined to the trenches along with his men, witnesses the horrors of trench warfare firsthand. He sees the toll that the constant shelling, the sniper fire, the fear of sudden death takes on his soldiers. He shares their rations, their cramped and muddy quarters, their ever-present fear. Despite the grim conditions, Beauregard's spirit remains unbroken. He visits his men in the trenches, offering words of encouragement, sharing stories of past victories, reminding them of what they are fighting for. He knows that their situation is desperate, but he refuses to give up hope. He clings to the belief that something, some unforeseen event, might yet save the Confederacy. He believes in his men, in their courage and tenacity, and he refuses to let them down. He will fight alongside them to the bitter end, whatever that end may be. In late July 1864, a daring plan emerges from the ranks of the besieged Confederate Army. A group of Pennsylvania coal miners fighting for the Union propose digging a massive tunnel beneath the Confederate lines and detonating explosives beneath their trenches. The explosion, they believe, will create a gap in the Confederate defenses, allowing Union forces to pour through and break the siege. The plan, though audacious, is fraught with risk. The tunnel must be dug in secrecy, the explosives placed with precision, and the assault coordinated with military precision. Failure, the engineers warn, could result in friendly fire casualties and a disastrous repulse. Despite the risks, General Ambrose Burnside, commander of the Union 9th Corps, approves the plan. The tunnel is dug, the explosives are placed, and on the morning of July 30th, 1864, the charge is detonated. The explosion is massive, creating a crater over 30 feet deep and 170 feet wide in the Confederate lines. The initial assault, however, is a disaster. Union troops, poorly led and unprepared for the chaos, become trapped in the crater, easy targets for Confederate counterattacks. The Battle of the Crater, as it comes to be known, is a costly failure for the Union Army. The Confederate defense, though shaken by the initial explosion, holds firm. Beauregard, rallying his troops with characteristic zeal, personally leads a counterattack that drives the Union forces back and seals the breach in their lines. The battle, however, marks a turning point in the Siege of Petersburg. The Confederate Army, already stretched thin and running low on supplies, has suffered heavy casualties. Their morale, though briefly boosted by their stand at the crater, is crumbling under the weight of defeat after defeat. On April 2, 1865, after months of siege warfare and dwindling supplies, Confederate forces abandoned Petersburg. The city, a vital rail hub and the key to the defense of Richmond, falls to the Union Army. The fall of Petersburg marks the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. With their capital city captured and their armies in retreat, the Confederate cause is all but lost. Beauregard, his forces shattered and his hopes dashed, joins Lee's retreating army as it flees westward, pursued relentlessly by Grant's victorious forces. The retreat from Petersburg is a harrowing ordeal for the defeated Confederate army. Hounded by Union cavalry, low on supplies, and demoralized by defeat, they trudge westward, hoping against hope to escape Grant's grasp and prolong the fight. Beauregard, his health failing after years of campaigning, witnesses the disintegration of the army he has served with such distinction. He sees the despair in the eyes of his men, the once proud Confederate gray now faded and tattered, their dreams of Southern independence shattered on the battlefields of Virginia. On April 9, 1865, surrounded and outgunned, General Robert E. Lee surrenders his army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The surrender marks the effective end of the American Civil War. The Confederacy's dream of independence extinguished in the rolling hills of Virginia. Beauregard, present at the surrender, is devastated by the defeat. He knows that the South has fought bravely, that his men have sacrificed everything for their cause, but the war is over and the Union has prevailed. He can only watch, his heart heavy with sorrow, as the Confederate flag is furled for the last time. The roar of cannons, the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, these were the sounds that dominated P.G.T. Beauregard's life during the American Civil War. Beneath the stoic facade, a different battle raged within his heart. The war was a deeply personal tragedy for those caught in its grip. Beauregard was not immune to the emotional turmoil that shadowed every campaign. The weight of command left an indelible mark on his soul. Amidst the chaos and carnage of war, one constant source of solace and strength remained for Beauregard, his beloved wife, Caroline Deslandes. Their love story, forged years before the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter, served as an anchor, grounding him in a world teetering on the brink of destruction. Caroline, a woman of grace, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty, stood by her husband's side throughout the war's darkest chapters. She understood the burdens he carried, the sacrifices he made, and the emotional toll exacted by the conflict. Her unwavering love and support provided him with a safe haven, a refuge from the storms that raged around him. When the war separated them, as it often did, their letters became lifelines, fragile threads of love and longing spun across battlefields and through enemy lines. Caroline's missives, filled with news from home, words of encouragement and unwavering faith in her husband's abilities, provided a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. Her presence in his life, whether by his side or through the written word, served as a constant reminder of what he was fighting for, not just a political ideal or a way of life, but the love of a good woman and the promise of a future together. The life of a general, particularly during wartime, offered little respite from the demands of duty. Beauregard, despite his love for Caroline and their children, often found himself torn between his responsibilities to the Confederacy and his longing for a normal life, for quiet evenings by the fireside and the simple joys of family. The war, a relentless and unforgiving master, demanded his constant attention. Campaigns were planned, battles fought, and strategies debated, leaving little time for personal matters. Letters were often delayed, visits postponed, and precious moments with loved ones sacrificed on the altar of military necessity. Yet, Even amidst the chaos of war, Beauregard never lost sight of his family. He wrote to Caroline whenever he could, his letters filled with a mixture of military updates, tender words of affection, and a palpable longing for the day when they could be reunited. He carried their portraits with him, small tokens of love and hope tucked away in his breast pocket, tangible reminders of the life that awaited him beyond the battlefield. These small acts of devotion, these glimpses into the heart of the general, revealed the depth of his love for his family and the sacrifices he made in the name of duty. The war's cruel hand extended beyond the battlefields, casting a long shadow over the lives of those who loved and depended on the men who fought. For Beauregard, the separation from his children, particularly his young sons, weighed heavily on his mind. He had always been a devoted father, cherishing the time he spent with his children, sharing stories, imparting wisdom, and reveling in their youthful energy. The war, however, had erected an insurmountable barrier between them, robbing him of precious years and leaving an aching void in his heart. He wrote to them often, his letters filled with a mixture of fatherly advice, tales of adventure, and a palpable longing to be reunited. He sent them gifts whenever he could, small tokens of affection meant to bridge the vast distance that separated them. Yet he knew that nothing could truly compensate for his absence, for the missed birthdays, the unspoken words, the stolen moments of childhood. The war had robbed him of their laughter, their hugs, their unconditional love, leaving him with a profound sense of loss and a heart heavy with unspoken grief. The American Civil War, a conflict born of irreconcilable differences, tore apart the very fabric of the nation, dividing families, communities, and even those bound by the sacred ties of blood. The Beauregard family, despite their shared history and deep Southern roots, found themselves on opposing sides of the chasm that had opened up between North and South. Beauregard's brother, Henry Toutant Beauregard, a career officer in the United States Navy, remained loyal to the Union. His decision, though painful for both brothers, reflected the complex loyalties of the time, a testament to the war's ability to shatter even the strongest of bonds. The two brothers, once close confidants, found themselves on opposite sides of the battlefield, their shared heritage overshadowed by the ideological divide that had fractured the nation. Their story, a microcosm of the war's tragic impact on families across the land, served as a stark reminder of the conflict's human cost. Despite their differences, a sense of familial duty and a shared respect for their chosen paths bound them together. Letters were exchanged, albeit infrequently, carrying news of loved ones and offering glimpses into their respective worlds forever altered by the war's destructive path. The written word, a lifeline in a world consumed by conflict, offered a unique window into the private thoughts and emotions of those caught in the maelstrom of the American Civil War. Beauregard's letters to Caroline and his children, penned in moments snatched from the jaws of war, provide a poignant and intimate portrait of a man wrestling with the demands of duty, the pangs of love and loss, and the ever-present shadow of death. His words, often hastily scribbled on scraps of paper or composed by candlelight in the confines of his tent, reveal a depth of emotion rarely glimpsed on the battlefield. He wrote of his longing for home, his anxieties for his family's well-being, and his unwavering belief in the righteousness of the Confederate cause. He shared his triumphs and his setbacks, his moments of despair and his flickers of hope, offering Caroline a glimpse into the inner life of the general, the man behind the uniform. These letters, carefully preserved and cherished by his family, serve as a testament to the enduring power of love and the human spirit's ability to find solace even in the darkest of times. Through his words, we catch a glimpse of the man behind the myth, the loving husband, the devoted father, the complex and deeply human figure who navigated the treacherous currents of war with courage, conviction, and an unwavering belief in the cause for which he fought. History often remembers its generals through their military exploits and triumphs. Yet beneath the rank and ambition lay men capable of great love and profound sorrow. P.G.T. Beauregard was a man of deep feeling. He loved his family fiercely, carried the weight of his decisions heavily, and yearned for peace. His compassion extended to his men. He cared for their well-being and mourned their losses. He understood their sacrifices and the toll of battle. His humanity shone through in his interactions, his concern for their welfare, and his belief in their courage. Despite his flaws, he was a man worthy of respect. True strength lay in compassion and shared sacrifice. As the Confederacy crumbled around him, as the dream of Southern independence faded into the annals of history, P.G.T. Beauregard found himself drawn back to the one constant in his life: his family. The war, for all its horrors and sacrifices, had only served to strengthen the bonds of love and loyalty that bound them together. With the war's end, he returned to Caroline, his beloved companion, her steadfast love a beacon of hope in the aftermath of defeat. He sought solace in the embrace of his children, their laughter a balm to his war-weary soul. Though the war had exacted a heavy toll, leaving scars both physical and emotional, Beauregard found a measure of peace in the quiet rhythms of family life. He devoted himself to rebuilding their lives, seeking to provide for their future and instill in his children the values of honor, integrity, and perseverance that had guided him through the darkest of times. The war may have defined his public persona, but it was his family, his unwavering love for them, and their unwavering love for him that sustained him through the trials of war and provided him with a sense of purpose and belonging in the uncertain years that followed. The year is 1865. The American Civil War has ended. The Confederacy lies shattered, its cities scarred, its people grappling with defeat. For P.G.T. Beauregard, defeat is a bitter pill. Stripped of his rank, he returns to a changed South. The plantation society is gone, swept away by war and emancipation. He returns to Caroline, their reunion bittersweet. The South faces the daunting task of reconciliation and reconstruction. Beauregard grapples with defeat and reconciliation. The South occupied and in disarray. Some cling to the lost cause, refusing defeat. Beauregard sees the futility of clinging to the past. He urges acceptance and rebuilding within the reunited nation. Despite criticism, he believes in reconciliation for the South's future. Beauregard seeks to rebuild the South, finding new purpose beyond the battlefield. In 1869, he becomes president of the Louisiana Lottery Company, a financially rewarding but ethically controversial decision. The lottery raises revenue for the state, but draws criticism for its questionable practices. Critics argue it targets the poor and fosters corruption. Beauregard justifies it as a means to generate funds for a struggling state. He believes it offers hope and financial salvation, yet his association with the lottery tarnishes his reputation. Despite his involvement in business ventures, Beauregard never strays far from his military roots. He remains a keen observer of military affairs, writing articles and essays on strategy, tactics, and the lessons learned from the Civil War. He also embarks on a project close to his heart, the writing of his memoirs. In his memoirs, published posthumously, Beauregard seeks to set the record straight about his role in the war, to defend his decisions, and to offer his perspective on the Confederacy's triumphs and failures. His writings, though colored by the inevitable biases of a Confederate general, provide valuable insights into the Southern perspective on the war, its causes, and its consequences. Beauregard, in his memoirs, emerges as a complex figure, a man of undeniable military talent, unwavering conviction, and deep-seated loyalty to the South. His voice, though silenced by death, continues to resonate through his writings, offering a glimpse into the mind of one of the Confederacy's most enigmatic and enduring figures. His memoirs, though controversial in their time, remain valuable primary sources for historians seeking to understand the complexities of the American Civil War and its enduring legacy. P.G.T. Beauregard died in New Orleans on February 20, 1893, at the age of 74. He was laid to rest with full military honors, his passing mourned by many in the South, where he was remembered as a hero, a symbol of Confederate defiance, and a brilliant, if flawed, military leader. In the decades since his death, Beauregard's legacy, like that of the Confederacy itself, has been the subject of much debate and reevaluation. His statues, once prominent symbols of Southern heritage, have become flashpoints in the ongoing debate over race, history, and the legacy of slavery in the United States. To understand Beauregard's legacy, one must grapple with the complexities of his time, the contradictions inherent in a man who fought for a cause rooted in the preservation of slavery, yet who also exhibited moments of compassion and humanity. His story serves as a reminder of the enduring power of the past to shape the present, the importance of engaging with history in all its complexities, and the need to acknowledge both the triumphs and the tragedies that have shaped the nation we are today. Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard's life was a tapestry woven from the threads of a nation divided. Born into the privilege and contradictions of the antebellum South, he rose to prominence as a military strategist. From Fort Sumter to Appomattox, he served the Confederacy with unwavering conviction. His story is not just a chronicle of battles won and lost. It's a testament to the complexities of a man shaped by his time. We've seen his triumphs, the victory at First Manassas, the defense of Charleston, the hope ignited at the Crater. Yet alongside these moments of military prowess, we've witnessed the personal toll of war, the anguish of separation from loved ones, the burden of command etched upon his features. Through his letters, we've glimpsed the man beneath the uniform, a devoted husband and father, a leader respected by his men even in defeat. His life reminds us that history is not merely a collection of dates and battles, but a tapestry woven from the lives of individuals, each with their own motivations and moments of both greatness and despair. P.G.T. Beauregard remains a figure of fascination and controversy. His statues, once symbols of Southern heritage, now force us to confront the legacy of slavery in the Civil War. How do we reconcile his military brilliance with the cause he fought for? There are no easy answers to the complexities of history. Beauregard's legacy challenges us to grapple with difficult questions about race and justice. It compels us to confront the past, to understand how it shapes the present. Beauregard's story reminds us that history is messy, contradictory, and open to reinterpretation.